Welcome to the Co-Creative Sessions, your access point for knowledge and expertise from artists, creatives, change makers, designers, entrepreneurs, and community enthusiasts in the South Coast and beyond.
It's just these little fleeting moments, which with photography, that's what we do. We stop time.
Welcoming the viewer into what we do is just so important.
How can you look at the different facets of your creative work?
And now, the Co-Creative Sessions. Thank you for joining us for the latest entry in the Co-Creative Sessions. I'm Scott Bishop, and I'm happy to introduce this special recorded session, originally presented live at Co-Creative on Saturday, October 21st, 2023. Andy Anello has been DJing since 2017, when he created New Moon Dance Party. New Moon provides a platform for the organization and promotion of radically inclusive underground dance music events in New Bedford. New Moon hosts a party on the first Saturday of every month at the Co-Creative Center called Body, 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 and has also organized dozens of events at venues including Hatch Street Studios, Overhead Arts, Hippo, Ropeworks, Yoga on Union, and School of Yoga, New Bedford. New Moon is committed to the idea of the dance floor as a transformative space and believes that dance should be free and accessible to all people. And now, with this special DJ workshop, Andy Anello.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this workshop, Introduction to Dance Music DJing, presented as part of the Co-Creative Sessions at the Co-Creative Center in downtown New Bedford. My name is Andy Anello, and I'm here on behalf of New Moon Dance Party to present this workshop. So we'll get right into it. So just to give you a little rundown of what we're doing today, we have basically divided the workshop into two parts. The first part is going to be me presenting some stuff, demoing a little bit, and talking a little bit about dance music culture, and then you'll get a chance for the second hour to hop on the decks and try stuff out for yourself. We're set up in here with kind of the full setup with two vinyl turntables, but I'm also going to move these digital tables into the other room so that we'll have two stations set up and you can practice on either one and bounce back and forth. So I want this workshop to be really informal. So please feel free to interrupt me and ask questions, and we can have discussions. Any of that is totally fine. And you may already have a lot of knowledge about DJing or info you want to share, and that's totally fine. I like to think of this as a skill share if you have stuff you want to bring to the table. But I also am kind of considering this a workshop for absolute beginners, so I'm not going to assume any knowledge. And for anyone who views this online or wants to, if I run this workshop again, this is meant to be for absolute beginners. And one of the purposes of this workshop, like New Moon, we throw parties locally, dance parties, and we're really interested in cultivating the scene of underground dance music DJs. So, if you get really into it and you go off and become a DJ and you need a place to perform, our party is a possible venue for you if you play stuff that is kind of in the realm of music that we feature. So we're really interested in cultivating local talent and building a scene in New Bedford. So just to run through this agenda really quickly, we'll do some introductions, and then I'll talk a little bit about the history, culture, and values of dance music. We'll talk about equipment, a little bit about technique, and show some inspiration. And then there'll be time for questions and further discussion at the end. And then we'll get into practicing. Let's get into it. So just to tell you a little bit about New Moon Dance Party, although everyone in this room probably knows, but for those online, New Moon is a collaborative project that produces inclusive underground dance music events in and around New Bedford. In addition to myself, our parties are organized by the other resident DJs, Neil Matheson and Bay, Michael Venezia, and as well as other community partners such as the Marie Equizine Library, Queer Arts Council New Bedford, Co-Creative Center, and others. And we have a few different party series that we run. Our main party, which we host on the first Saturday of every month from October through June, is called Body, Body, Body. And it's an 18+ underground club-style dance party that happens right here in this room at Co-Creative Center. And it features a broad range of music from house to techno to disco to bass music, lots of different approaches to underground dance floor-focused music. And we feature a different guest DJ every month who's supported by the resident DJs, Neil, Bay, and myself. And the party aims to bring an authentic underground dance club experience to downtown New Bedford and to provide a safe space for self-expression to people from all backgrounds, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, or income level. And yeah, woohoo! So during the months of July, August, and September, we also host outdoor family-friendly daytime parties. And for 3 years now, we've hosted a house and disco-focused party at Riverside Park in the north end of New Bedford called Riverside Beats. And this year, for the first time ever, we organized a roller disco event in collaboration with New Bedford's annual community rollout at Buttonwood Park. So that was a fun party. So just like a little bit about me and why I'm offering this workshop. So I just want to start off by saying I still very much consider myself to be, maybe not a beginner, but an intermediate DJ. Like I've been doing it for about 5 years. I started doing it when I started throwing these parties. So it was like, I want to see this, have this music here, I want to build up this culture here. And so I just learned to do it to kind of fill that role. I think I know enough to get people started on their paths. And so over the past few years, several people have approached me and said, oh, can you teach me some stuff? Can you show me how to DJ? And so I kind of offered to do that and put out a call to see if anyone else was interested. And then Co-Creative Center approached me and said, hey, why don't you do this as part of the Co-Creative Sessions? So that's how we got here. I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of the history and values and culture of dance music. So first we needed to define what I mean by dance music, which that's like obviously a really vague term. It could apply to all sorts of styles of music like salsa or hip hop or ballroom or square dancing. Like any music you play that people dance to is dance music. But what I specifically mean when I say dance music is really music that in a musical culture that coalesced around what came to be called disco music, and then what the kind of descendants of that from that scene. So, and there are a lot of genres that kind of descended from that, and yeah, but like house music comes from that, techno music. Eventually you get like electro kind of coming from some of the European sounds and stuff like that. But you know, it's all very complicated and messy, but that's what is fun about music. This is, are you familiar with this?
I've never seen it.
Oh, okay, it's great. It's very dated in a way because it was actually started being developed and written in like the late 90s, but it's this one person's take on kind of trying to map electronic music from its origins to the present. And this is the second iteration. They updated it as the internet, like the old site broke and then he made it again. So there's all sorts of like, it's all really specific to his tastes. So he'll have a lot of very opinionated takes on each of these genres of music. And when you go to the actual website, which I'm not gonna try to get into showing right now, but you can click on any of the like little genres and it will branch out into more genres, and each one will have an example and it'll have a write-up and kind of contextualize the history. And he kind of maps it. He's talking just about electronic music. So things like hip hop are included, but things like soul music aren't. If I were to, the kind of dance music I'm talking about is more, includes live music, includes like soul music and stuff like that. But yeah, I still think it's really, you can really get lost kind of exploring the genres there. So I just wanted to show that as a kind of example of how complex it all gets as these genres splinter off. I just picked out these two DJs as an example of a way to talk about the spectrum of what dance music can be and mean. And so how many people in this room are familiar with Grandmaster Flash? Have you heard that name? Raise your hand. Yeah, so all of you have. How many of you have heard of David Mancuso? So almost no one, right? So David Mancuso was as much of a pioneer to dance music and disco in that culture as Grandmaster Flash was to hip hop. So David Mancuso started throwing parties out of his home in Manhattan in 1970, and his apartment came to be known as the Loft, and the parties were called the Loft Parties. He was throwing these parties all night, and he didn't have a cabaret license or a liquor license, so it was members only technically. So that's how he was able to kind of get around those requirements that would be there for a traditional venue. And he was playing, he wasn't serving, there was no alcohol served there, and he would play a wide variety of sounds from soul to Latin to disco, jazz, everything. As he developed his music selection and approach to playing, he eventually came to this point where he wouldn't even mix songs. He would play a record, let it play to its very end, cue up the next record, and just fade it over, and that was it. Like every record, start to finish, no matter what, that series of parties in that space is like really seminal to dance music. All of the people who went on to make the clubs that later became famous were attended these loft parties and like speak of them very highly. Meanwhile, in the South Bronx, Grandmaster Flash is there with his 2 turntables, like completely helping to invent a new genre of music, inventing new techniques like beat juggling and scratching and cutting and all that kind of like technical wizardry that happens on turntables.
And are you going to go into those terms more later?
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
And when we get to the questions, we can kind of talk about those in more detail. But part of the reason I bring it up is because that approach is, I kind of see that on the other side of the spectrum, where it's very much about the performance, like the DJ as this kind of wizard performer and as the center of attention of a party. There are scratch DJs who they can do a whole routine and entertain people for a half an hour with just 1 record and 2 samples, just fresh and Whereas someone like David Mancuso, his approach is to present music that maybe you haven't heard and to kind of lead you on a journey. And whereas like one of those DJ scratch session sets might last an hour, Mancuso would play for 10 hours nonstop, you know what I mean, without stopping. So it's just like, it's not that one way is right or wrong or better or worse, it's just that it's a spectrum. And you can fall anywhere on that spectrum of like being very performative or being more oriented toward track selection and creating a vibe slowly and building it up. For the purposes of this workshop, I'm talking more about the tradition that kind of descended from Mancuso as opposed to that hip hop tradition. And that's more what our parties kind of focus on. So like I said, there's no wrong way to do it. It's just one way to think about the range of possibilities within DJing. This is a picture of Frankie Knuckles, who is largely considered to be the godfather of house music. After DJing in New York, he started a club in Chicago called The Warehouse, and that club gives house its name. The house and warehouse is where you get the term for house music. This is a letter on the right-hand side of the screen that shows, it's him just writing to his friends about his experience of attending a loft party. And so he's attending the party with Larry Levan, who's another DJ we'll talk about in a minute, very important DJ. And they are going up to the loft. Larry kind of drags him out and says, hey, we got to check out this party. And I'll just read a little bit of it. He says, there was a line of people going up the stairs from the street. We walked right past them to the top of the stairs where a very beautiful black man checked membership. Come to find out later, the man was a woman named Yvonne. She let us in ahead of the queue. This was a theme night, I believe. Everyone was dressed in late 40s, early 50s fashion. The guys in pleated pants and Hawaiian shirts, and the girls were in circle skirts and Angora sweaters. The 2 things everyone wore in common were saddle shoes and Mickey Mouse ears. I remember the room moving in such a tight rhythm that all the bodies felt like one. The front room was lined with church pews. On the floor in front of the booth was a beanbag chair and snake pillow. At the head of the room, by the front of the windows, was a decorated Christmas tree. There were people standing in the pews, beating tambourines, blowing whistles, and playing a wide assortment of percussion instruments. I don't remember what song was playing when we got there, but all of a sudden it came to an end. The room is now dark. You can't see anything. Then the sound of a Hammond organ is building in the room. A cool breeze is blowing now through the room that was seconds before a sauna. As the song builds to a fever pitch with its percussive and Hammond crescendos, it breaks to a percussive toys, bells, timbales, congas, etc. The song was City, Country, City by War. The room is crazy now. Everyone is locked in a spell. I never witnessed, let alone been a part of this kind of madness. I need to find who is responsible. As I danced toward the back room area where the refreshments were, I came upon a small booth next to a tiny, tight hallway that led to the back. In that booth, in the dark, stood bent over two turntables with a flashlight, was a man who had a remarkable resemblance to Jesus Christ. I thought for sure I was in heaven. The man's name is David Mancuso. At about 12 noon, it was all over. I didn't realize I had broke night. I met some great new people, and to this day, my life hasn't been the same. So I share that to again, highlight this style of DJing where the DJ is not even, like no one even knows where the DJ was during the party. Like that, the party was about the people being kind of in communion together and sharing an experience and kind of slowly getting to this point of kind of ecstatic, dance, basically. And that's true for a lot of my favorite clubs going out in like the late 90s and early 2000s. Like I can picture the club, I can picture the party. I couldn't even tell you where the DJ was. There wasn't a spotlight on them and they weren't like the center of attention, they were facilitating the party. So that's really the culture that I'm kind of interested in helping to create and foster. And I think in a lot of ways, even the dance music that I see in this lineage has really gotten away from. So just really quickly, because I mentioned Larry Levan, the Paradise Garage is kind of where all of this, I think, reaches a real focal point in terms of what the culture is, and eventually, like, we still kind of operate in this mold. The Paradise Garage was a club that was located at a parking structure at 84 King Street in New York City, and it operated from about 1978 until 1987. And it catered specifically to queer folks and was largely attended by Black and Latino people. And the club was members only, and that was, again, to kind of get around some of the restrictions that are placed on venues that are just open to the public and serve liquor. So there also was no alcohol served there. And so, the membership was loose, so and members could bring friends, and you get a membership by knowing someone who's already a member. So the club kind of used that membership model to also really protect and center the marginalized folks that attended the parties. And so there was like a door person, and it was kind of like, they would limit who could get in as the club became more popular. But it really was, even with that restriction, known for its inclusiveness and for its kind of like, it was just a place where a really diverse group of people could get together and party. So this idea of the club as sanctuary, and it's as like a place to like release your tension and really let loose and take a break from like what the hardships of your life, was also reflected in the music. So dance music selected by Larry Levan at the Garage tended to be soulful with big uplifting vocals, but he also played a really eclectic sound. He played a lot of electronic music as that developed. He played records from across many different genres, including disco funk, hip hop, reggae, and what came to be known as house music also was developed at the Paradise Garage. And that place was also famous for its sound system with lots of bass reinforcement and clarity, like in an approach to sound that was really overall. So if you ever see pictures of it, there's like right in the middle of the club, there are all these horns mounted in a circle. So the sound is like radiating out in all directions. And then the bass reinforcement was like all around the room. So that again gets to this idea of like, you're in a space where there isn't one focus of attention. It's like you're in the party and the sound is like all around you and coming at you from every direction. Yeah, it is a good feeling. So I needed to take some time to talk about all that so I can talk about the ethos of this culture as I see it, which is in its best form is inclusive, has this kind of utopian spirit, this idea of like trying to create like a temporary autonomous space that is like has a different set of values than maybe you find outside of the club space, that operates as a sanctuary, especially for marginalized people. DIY is important. These clubs I'm talking about, like especially the Garage, was a big club, like lots of staff and everything. But Larry Levan was in the middle of the party known to like go out and like adjust a light because it wasn't working properly, or like stop the music if like something wasn't right. So it's like there as well as those big parties in that party and parties like it spawned a scene that now operates in DIY spaces everywhere, which is like what we do here. So DIY is important. And then finally, music as healing, music as a way to like, to feel good, to get it, to rejuvenate. And as I've already mentioned, what this kind of translates to in terms of DJing, how this is reflected in the music, is that these kinds of parties tend to have continuous blends with long mixes, as opposed to like in hip hop or in other genres, there's a lot of cutting, which means like transitioning suddenly from one track to another. There are lots of reasons for this, and it's not that dance music DJing never has cutting, it does, but in general, that's one way to characterize it. DJ not the center of attention, which I already mentioned, loud and clear sound. The DJ as digger and selector. So as you go to a club and you get to know the DJ, you start to trust their musical tastes, even if they're bringing you sounds you've never heard. So a big part of the DJ's job in this genre is going out and finding new music and really curating music that is like the best. And then long parties. Over the years, as like things like festivals have gotten more popular, DJ sets have gotten shorter. But traditionally, it wasn't uncommon for DJs to play 6-hour sets. Like that was like, and a lot of old school DJs, like they really kind of scoff at this idea of doing like 1-hour sets and stuff like that. At our party, the reality is we kind of have to, but there's something to be said, and we try to let our guests have at least 2 hours. So something to be said about having the time to really stretch out, take people on a journey, build up a musical vocabulary, and really progress through the night. Now we can talk about equipment finally. So just to break it down basically, so there's the mixer, which has multiple channels, and then each of the players feed into one of the channels. So we have 2 digital players here, and those are feeding into, there's a RCAs coming out, feeding into these 2 channels, and then 2 record players, which are feeding into these 2 outside channels. And the way it works is, I'll just kind of run down what the mixer is doing. So as the sound enters, it goes into this, which is a gain knob, kind of like volume, but it's like the intensity of the signal you're controlling.
Call it a gain knob?
Gain or trim.
Gotcha.
Yeah, gain, yeah. So I'm not gonna actually play this, but I'll just put it on so you can see. So as I turn up the gain, you'll see on this meter, the level increasing. There's no sound coming out because I have the music turned off right now, the fader's down. But you want to get a strong signal, so at least up to 0, somewhere in this orange range. You don't want it to be, it won't even happen on this one, like on this channel, you don't want it to be up into the red. That means the sound is clipping, which means it's going to start distorting.
Oh, yeah.
So this is very important. A lot of times when you're cueing a track, like getting ready to play it, you check the gain and you make sure it's at a level that's strong but not clipping, because it will sound awful. And also that it matches to some extent the level of the track that you're playing, so it doesn't get really way too loud when you bring in the new track. Yeah, so it's a gain knob, and then these are EQs, so equalizers. So this controls the high frequencies, the medium frequencies, and low frequencies. And what they do is, if you turn it to the left, it's going to decrease that frequency. So I'll actually put on, let me do this track. So if I turn the high frequency down, you'll hear the highs cut out.
Yep.
And this is a full kill, which means when you turn it all the way to the left, it will completely cut out that band of frequencies. If you turn it up, you'll hear the highs get crispier. This is mids. So if you turn off mids and highs, you just have the bass, and then you have nothing. This is full kill, so it'll take out everything. So that's just the mids. Bass is back, highs. So this is an effects knob. So if you were to run effects through this mixer, this would control the effects.
Oh, effects.
Effects, yeah. So they talk about in terms of dry or wet, which is how much, if it's dry, there's no effect being applied. The more wet it is, the more it's running it through the effects processor. We don't have to worry about it today. I don't have any effects running through here, besides this filter, which we'll get into. But yeah, just so you know what it is.
What's an example of an effect?
Like an echo,
Okay.
a delay,
Okay.
a flanger. There's all different ones. Some mixers, like especially Pioneer mixers, have them built in. This mixer doesn't. The only thing it has is a filter, which I'll talk about now. So the filter, it's just a high pass and low pass filter. So it does a similar thing to what these do, but it does it, basically you select the kind of filter here, so I'm gonna select high pass filter, and then you press the button on the channels you want to apply it to. So I'm just gonna apply it to the channel that's currently open. And then this knob controls the frequency. So right now, it's a high pass filter. So as I turn it up, you hear you'll hear just the highs, yeah. And if you do a low pass, it's going to do the opposite. So right now you hear, well, this is like a bad part of the track for this, but let's see, because it's like a breakdown. So if I apply it to here, you'll hear it's just letting the low frequencies through. So now you're just hearing the bass.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're hearing the mids too, and now you're hearing everything. It also has a resonance knob, which it just affects the way in which it's processing the sound. So it's not really important, but with the resonance, let's put it back on a high pass. With the resonance all the way down, it'll do it it'll take out frequencies in kind of a flat way, like just in a neutral way. If I turn the resonance up, you'll hear kind of like a sweeping sound. Like hear that kind of whooshing.
I love it.
Yeah, that's with more resonance. Okay, so.
It's just one way to sort of like.
Yeah, to sculpt the sound. Yeah, so you can use it as like as an accent. So like at an appropriate part of the song, you just be like, woo. You know, just to like add some interest to the song. It's a little bit performative in that way. You can also use it the same way you'd use these. So me doing, with a resonance flat, me turning this to here is basically the same as me doing this.
Okay.
It's the same thing, basically. You're gonna get to the same place. So yeah, that's the filter. The faders are how you actually control how much of the track is going out to the speakers. So with the fader down, no sound, fader up, sound. And then it's just, it's gradual, so you can determine how much is in. Generally with DJing with this type of mixer, when a track is fully playing in the room, the fader is pegged all the way up. You're not using the fader to control the intensity, you're using the trim for that. So this is just like out, in, and then you can gradually bring it in if you're trying to do a slow blend. There's also a crossfader, which we don't use quite as much for dance music, but you can. Like this, it's more for cutting, well, you can use it for blends, especially on a mixer that doesn't have up faders, you would use it for blends. You can set the slope of how it moves between one track and the other, so it could be either a hard cut, or it could be like a slow blend, just like one of these, like a slow spectrum. But it's moving from one track to another track. And with this, with 4 channels, you have to select which track is on the X and which track is on the Y to move between. But this is the tool, like very much so for hip hop DJs and anyone who's doing cutting and beat juggling and scratching, because they're constantly moving tracks just totally in and totally out. And when they're scratching, they're moving the track that they're scratching in and out really quickly. So this provides a lot of room for that kind of creative expression. Whereas these ones are more for like slow blending, I would say. For the turntable, I just want to talk about kind of like the different parts. There's the platter, which is the part where the record goes that spins. There's a tone arm, which is the part with the needle at the end that you place on the record. And then there's a start-stop button on the lower left. And next to that is a button that you use to select the RPM of the record, the rotations per minute. So records are pressed at either 33 or 45 typically. There are 78s as well, but for the most part, for dance music, you'll mostly find 33 or 45. Sorry, let's get this back. And then there's a little adapter here in that top left corner that is for when you're playing little 7-inch records that have the middle cut out. So to put it on the spindle, you need like this little adapter. On the tone arm itself, there is a weight on the back that balances the weight of the stylus. This is all stuff you need to know when you're like calibrating and setting up the turntable. These turntables are set up and ready to go, but just so you know. But important for DJing also is underneath the record here, there's a slip mat, which is the thing that allows, when you're playing the turntable, allows you to put your hand on the record and the record will stop spinning, but the platter will keep spinning. So if you had like a rubber mat, like say these turntables ship and would arrive to you with a rubber mat. If you try to do this with a rubber mat, it's gonna be a mess. So what DJs put is like a little basically piece of felt between the record and the turntable so that they can put the needle on, like rewind and fast forward, sorry. And scratch and do all that kind of stuff. You need a slip mat. That's basically it. Like, turntables are not relevant to a lot of DJs these days. Like, it's obviously an old technology. Some people love them, and I think there are things that are great about them, but it's not like playing on a turntable is any better or worse than playing digitally. It's just another way to approach DJing. The downsides with turntables are obviously that they're heavy, they're operating in an analog way, so there's a lot of things that can go wrong, like record skipping, the needle being dirty. There's just right. There are solutions to all the problems, but a lot of clubs aren't really set up to play records anymore. That's just the sad truth. But we here at Body 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 are, so we really support vinyl DJing. I think it's great. It's great to keep the tradition alive. So like with our booth, we do all this stuff for isolation. We use these concrete blocks on these rubber racket balls. That helps with isolation. There are the feet themselves for these turntables are basically mounted on rubber bands. These are sorbethane feet that also absorb vibration. And then after all that, if people are dancing really hard, the records will still skip. So we've now developed a system where we actually hang the whole booth from the ceiling. So when people start dancing a lot, we have turnbuckles on the chains we can turn, and we'll elevate the table off the ground so that it's completely 100% isolated. The downside being like, it moves. So it's kind of like you can get seasick DJing with it, but it does the job perfectly. So it's what we need to do, because I think some of you have been at a party here where people are really dancing hard and the needle is just going everywhere. And the worst feeling behind the decks as a DJ is to be like, no, please don't dance. Like, no, you want people to dance. So we are always trying to find good solutions for that kind of thing. But yeah, turntables are great.
Can I ask you what?
Yeah.
When you say calibrate, what do you mean by that? Do you have to do that every single time?
If you had like an at-home setup, or if you had a permanent setup in a club, you would only need to do it once and then every once in a while. Mm-hmm. Where I'm moving the booth in and out all the time, I do kind of go through it every single time. But it basically means like the main calibrations are leveling the overall turntable. You can use just like a regular like little level you'd use at home, but I use this little like spirit level, so it sits right on the spindle, and then I can level the turntable by like turning the feet or shimming them.
Okay.
So yeah, you can take a look. So this just sits right on the spindle.
And it shows you if it's level or not?
Yeah.
The calibration. Oh yeah.
Yes, that's part of it. The first step for me is always like leveling the turntable. And that,
I've never seen that. I have
yeah.
never seen that either.
Yeah, and that little bottom part also doubles as an adapter for a 7-inch record too. And then the other main calibration is just balancing the tone arm itself, which, like, depending on the weight of the stylus, they'll have a different rating for what you need the weight to be on the this counterweight. The way it works is you just set it to 0, and then you get it, and then you turn it, the weight, either back on the arm or forward until the stylus is just floating. It's just perfectly balanced, like it won't bounce down or it won't go up.
I see.
And then once you're there, you turn that middle dial till it's at 0. So yeah, so you turn this dial until there's a little arrow and it lines up with 0, and then you turn the back. You turn it, and then you turn it until you get to turn the whole thing until you get to the weight that's rated for the cartridge. So I hope that makes sense. It's a little hard to explain. But then once that's true, then there's weight on it. It will actually sit on the record at the right appropriate weight. If you have it like too heavy or too light, it'll sound not as good.
Yeah, you can see why the record, why they would jump when people are dancing, because it's like all just barely.
It's just, there's only 3 grams of pressure, like weighting the whole thing down. In this case, 3.5. So, like, and there's a famously, like, DJs, especially if they're using cartridges with, sorry, I got to rebalance this, with head shells. I'm not going to get into explaining what that is, but basically, famously, scratch DJs and hip hop DJs and dance music DJs will do things like balance a penny on their stylus to add more weight. Like, they'll turn the weight all the way till it's as heavy as it can be, balance a penny, because it's like the room is people are dancing so much, or they're scratching really hard and the needle wants to jump. Maybe the needle's old. Like, these are all things that people do to like deal with these problems on the fly. But we try to keep things properly calibrated and not to have to deal with that. And all this goes to, like, we're always trying to get the best possible sound quality. I think that's really important. And so we try to keep it all balanced and calibrated. And then there's also anti-skating, which there's really differing opinions on this. Basically, like, when you play a record, the tone arm gets pulled in a certain direction. And if you have, like, you'll see it if I just let go of this needle. If I have anti-skating on, it'll actually pull the tone arm out to counteract the pull that the record is doing to the needle in. So it just makes the needle sit better in the groove. Like, scratch DJs will always keep it at 0. Even for the kind of DJing that we do here, I like to keep it at 0 because you're doing a lot of back cueing. So even though it's like working perfectly for when the record's playing just for listening, if you're gonna be spinning the record back a lot, I think it's nice to have the anti-skidding at 0, so you're not like adding extra force. But anyway, that's a matter for debate. So that's a basic calibration. All right, I'll try to zip through the rest of it. Different other kinds of setups you can have. These are standalone players, like media players. They descend from what are called CDJs, so CD players. So back in the day, these would have slots at the bottom you could put a CD into. That's how they started. And then there's a platter on top that basically acts like the record. Like you can use it to spin, like search through a track. You could use it to scratch. You can use the side of the platter to nudge, like basically push a track, like do a little fast forward or a little rewind. These players also have like start and stop buttons. They have a cue button, so you can set a cue point and jump back to it whenever you want. They also have something called hot cues, so you can set multiple cue points in a song and jump to different parts of the song. And like really importantly, they have a loop function, so you can pick out a couple bars of a track and loop it like forever. So it makes it like really easy to like keep extending a track for a really long time, or doing kind of live remixes on the spot. All that stuff is not as easily possible on turntables. It takes a lot more work and technique to get to the point where you can do that same thing on turntables. And then the huge benefit, obviously, is you don't have to carry around hundreds of pounds of records. Records are very expensive now. They've gotten more and more expensive as time goes on, and less places manufacture them. So it really makes sense to use digital files for that reason. It's also the standard at clubs. You'll find standalone players at any major club. They'll almost always be Pioneer players. They'll almost always be like the latest model of Pioneer player or something in that range. And you just show up, you plug in a USB stick, that has your tracks that have already been analyzed, and they're ready to play. So that is a big benefit to these. You can also play off a laptop.
Do you get street cred if you show up with crates of records?
In certain circles, and in some circles, it's like, well, you're just old, or you are, or you're trying to show off. You know, I mean, it really there's like a big debate about how much the technology what it has done to DJ culture. So like, the other thing on these players is there's a sync button. So if your tracks are properly beat gridded out, so in other words, like they've been properly analyzed so that they're basically the software that feeds these players maps your track onto a waveform. So like, and you can visualize the track, and then it adds, like basically, it marks off each beat. And if that's set up properly, and it analyzes them properly, you can play 2 tracks and just hit one button, and they'll just sync automatically.
It'll change the BPMs on one of the tracks to match the other one.
Exactly.
Oh, so you don't have to do it by your own ear?
No.
But
No.
Isn't that really bad if one's like totally different? Because then if they sync, and it might like completely screw up the.
Yeah, you still have to use tracks that are compatible.
Yeah.
So if you try to sync like a 90 BPM hip hop track with a 140 BPM, well, that's not maybe a great example, but say like like a house track at like 125, one of them's whichever one you bring in is gonna sound crazy. It's gonna pull it so far off. But that's true no matter what. You have to know your music. I'm not against the sync button. It's totally fine. It will, like anytime you change the tempo that you're playing a track, it will change the pitch. So it will pull it into a different musical key potentially, depending on how much you're speeding up or slowing down the track. What these players have, which is really cool too, is there's a master tempo button. And what that does is it uses software to retain the key of the track even when you change the tempo. So it won't necessarily sound crazy when you speed it up a lot. Yeah, that works to a certain extent. Like if you push it too far, you'll start to get like weird digital artifacting, or it'll sound like off. But you don't have that option at all on turntables. Like all this technology, and I'm really just scratching the surface. There's like so much you can do, and you could do multiple courses just on how to use all of the functions of like a modern digital player. But just to introduce you to the idea of it, and you'll get to try them, and you can ask more questions as we go. We already kind of talked about the mixer, so I'm just gonna zip through that. This is an all-in-one controller, which is a great option in a lot of DJs. We'll use these. People will even show up to clubs with these and just plug in if there's enough space in the booth. This one in this picture is an XDJ RX2, I think, and it will take USB sticks directly. Some of these controllers will only play off a laptop, so you have to have software running on a laptop to run the controller. Other ones will work just like these standalone players where you can use a USB or use a laptop. These are great. Like in terms of, if you had to buy each of these players and the mixer, and that's all stuck together here separately, it would be a lot more expensive. So they're more affordable in that sense. The downside is they're less flexible. So if like one deck breaks, like you're kind of done. Yeah, and but yeah, they're great. They often have like more performance options. Like see, there's that row of pads at the bottom. Those all can be used to control different functions like beat jumping, or like you can program them with samples, or you can use them to like control your loops. Like there's all sorts of things you can do with those. Those are included on some of the modern standalone players too. But anyway, there's like a lot in there. And of course, like you have a screen, like whether you plug in a laptop or you just use the onboard screen, you have a screen where you can see what's happening with the track, which you don't have with vinyl, obviously. There's like an upside and a downside to that. I think sometimes people get locked into like just DJing off the screen instead of like using their ears, which is like an easy habit to fall into. So I think when you're a beginner, what can be really great is to cover up the screen. Like, just be disciplined, be like, I'm gonna cover up the screen, just try to play from my ears and mixing that way. So, just to like mention, there's a world of software for DJing, which I'm not gonna dive into at all, really beyond just to say that it's out there. Rekordbox is what Pioneer players use. So if you analyze your tracks with Rekordbox and put them on a USB, and Rekordbox is free, you can then plug into any of these players and they'll already be analyzed. If you just have tracks on a USB and that you haven't run them through Rekordbox and you plug it in, the players will still try to analyze the tracks on the fly, but it will just be slower and maybe not as accurate, and you won't be able to check stuff in advance. So this Serato, which is a very popular program, that you can use with Serato compatible. Like this mixer is Serato compatible. Some are, some aren't. So it's really like, there's like they're all integrated with different kinds of equipment. DJ Pro is like a really nice light version you can run on mobile apps. You won't be able to use it necessarily with all sorts of equipment, but there are DJ controllers designed just for DJ Pro. And then Traktor is another one. Ableton is both a DAW, like a digital audio workstation. You can actually produce music using it, and it can be used for live performance. So to like trigger, like for what we call like live PA performances, where you're kind of like building up your tracks live and like using all the different samples and components and loops to like make music live. That's just to give you an idea of what's out there. And there's more, but I just have to include this because like it's really easy to get lost in all this stuff, and you do have to dig into it to find out what works for you, how you want to work, because everyone has their own workflow. But ultimately, it doesn't matter. Like it's just some music. Like don't get lost in the equipment. So basic dance music theory. I'm not a musician, so I'm giving this to you as in like what I've picked up just learning to DJ. So if you're not a musician, like this is like the very basics you need to know. I like this picture because it shows like what is actually happening when you're DJing. You're listening to two tracks which are like totally different tempos, different like styles, whatever, and then you're organizing them. And that's literally like when you're playing music on the mixer, what you're often doing is you have one track that's playing to the room, and that's also playing on your monitors. Like these monitors will play the same thing that's going on in the room, just closer up to me. And then when I am cueing a track, what I'm doing is I hit play on it, I start the track, I press a cue button. I didn't cover this on the mixer, but there's a cue button which decides if the track that's currently going into this line will be sent to your headphones. So with cue on, it's sent to the headphones. With cue off, it's not. Okay. So even with the fader down, if I press the cue button, now the headphones are off, but now I can hear it. And it won't go into the room or through my monitors until I put the fader up. So that's what I'm hearing in my headphones even right now. So like what you're often doing when you're DJing is you have a track that's playing through your monitors and then another track that's playing in your headphones, and you're spending time on the deck that's not currently playing, getting that track ready to match with the track that's playing through the speakers. Yeah. You may all know this, but I just wanted to that's like the basic, the fundamentals of DJing, which I will just skip over if I don't actually think to talk about.
And
okay.
That's pretty much usually what you're doing is 2 tracks and just trying to get one into the next and keep the vibe going.
Exactly, that's right. Yeah, 2 tracks, one into the next, keep the vibe going. That's perfect.
But I am a little confused because they don't always match up beat-wise necessarily.
No, and that's what we're going to get into. So I'm going to zip through the theory part, but basically beats, bars, and phrases. Are you guys familiar with these terms in music?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. So
if someone's not, you should review
no,
it,
go ahead. Yeah, for beginners. So I'm just going to zip through because we were already at I just want to make sure you guys have time to get on the decks, you all. So beats, obviously it's a beat. It's, like the kick drum in a song. A bar is, most dance music is in 4/4 time. So that's a time signature. So what that means is there are 4 beats in every measure, and each quarter note gets a beat. So that's 4/4 time. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that was 2 measures. So one measure is 4 beats. The next measure is 4 beats. Measures can also be called bars. So, and then a certain number of bars make up a phrase in music. And a phrase is like a complete musical idea. So in a song with lyrics, it might be like the chorus. It might be like the intro to the song. And it's often, it can usually be 8 or 16 bars in dance music. It could be more or less, but you'll get it. It follows a pattern, where it's a certain number of bars usually in a song will make up a phrase. The only reason it's important to know all that is that when you're mixing in a new track into a track that's already playing, it's best to start the new track, if you're starting at the beginning of it, at the start of a phrase of the track that's already playing. Or in other words, at the end of one phrase, at the start of a new phrase. And if you're playing a track that has lyrics and you're starting on a lyrical part, you want to start on a part of that, at the end of a phrase or the beginning of a new phrase that doesn't have lyrics, so you don't overlap and have a clash. That's one example. But when you're first starting, it can help to count beats, to learn how to count beats. And eventually you won't need to actually literally count them, but it's a track is playing and it's 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll be counting 4 beats. There's usually, in house music, there's usually an accent, like a snare or a clap on the 2 and the 4. So it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. To count beats and bars so that you understand phrases, you can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 3, 4, 6, 2, 3, 4, 7, 2, 3, 4, 8, 2, 3, 4. Probably a new phrase is starting. So you'll feel it. Music, dance music especially the stuff that's DJ friendly, it will signal to you when a new phrase is starting. The dance floor knows it, you'll feel it as well. There'll be often a cymbal hit on the start of a new phrase. You'll feel it build up and the energy go up and down. But it's just good to give it some thought and to think about how you line up different phrases might increase or decrease the energy, or what it does to a dance floor. Just all things to think about as you move through stuff. So this just shows a little breakdown of how to spot phrases. I'm just going to zip through this. You guys know what beats per minute are probably, but different genres tend to have different ranges of BPMs. That's why they kind of work together. If you're playing house music, you're probably going to be in this range. You might not want to mix a 115 track with a 130 track, but anything within a few beats of each other is fine. And it's great to move between genres too, but just keep in mind that you want to stay within a BPM range. Mixing in key is just the idea of playing music in keys that are either the same or musically compatible. This is, if you're a musician, you recognize this as a modified circle of fifths. So it's just showing all these different keys, but the reason this is designed for DJs is they've also applied this number. So it's 1A, 2A, 3A. The way you would use this is, if you have your tracks tagged using the system, you know you can play, if you're playing a track that's 1A, which would be A flat minor, you know you can play a track that's 2A or 12A. So you can move one segment up or down on the circle, and you're playing a track that is of a compatible key. Does that make sense? Yes. Or you can move to the outside of the circle. So you can go from 1A to 1B. So you could go from A flat minor to B major. You know that will be compatible. That's a basic, it's just a little like cheat sheet for DJs, and it's really useful. There are other tricks within it, like if you move forward, if you skip one, if you move forward two, that will create like this energy shift, like it'll increase the energy. But anyway, you can go into it, but just to introduce you to the idea of harmonic mixing, some DJs do it exclusively, other DJs don't use it at all. I think like it's great to use and not to have it like limit you too much. You don't want to like be, too devoted to it. All right, technique. We've already talked a lot about technique, but we're really going to talk today just about beat matching. So when you play a record, it's going to be playing at a specific BPM, and then you cue up a new record that probably 99 times out of 100 won't be the exact same beats per minute. Beat matching is just the act of getting the incoming track to line up in terms of the BPM and also in terms of like the beats lining up with the track that's already playing. These three examples, like the way it's visualized is those dots are beats. In the first example, the first record is playing faster than the second record, so there's a lot more dots and they're more compressed. In the second example, they're actually playing at the same speed, they're the same number of dots and they're equally spaced, but they're not lined up. And in the third example, they're both playing at the same tempo and they're lined up, and that's what you're going for. I just love this visual example of like what it feels like when one track is just slightly faster than the other, and you can feel it like tearing away from you, and you're trying to like bring it back.
That happens with real human beings when they play music together too.
Yeah, oh, totally. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Happens to me all the time. So this is just like a little showing you how you actually make this happen with the turntable. The record's playing. So when a track is playing, and I'll actually do like a kind of little mix in a minute, and it's ahead of the other track, you need to slow it down. Like one way to do that would just be to like gently drag your finger along the edge of the platter. So you can hear that slow down just a tiny bit. I'm going to make it more dramatic, but. So you wouldn't normally, you want to do it in such a way that it's not super like disruptive for the dance floor, but that's one way to like slow down a track to get it to line up with the other track. You're doing that just probably while the fader is down in your earphones to like get it to line up. And then once you get it to line up, you know, like I had to slow that track down. Like how am I going to make it actually line up? And that would be you take the pitch adjustment, and the way these work is pushing it up slows it down, and pulling it down speeds it up. You'll see there's a little like meter on here. It says -2468. These are percentage points. So like, I'm like, okay, I had to slow that down to get it to line up. I'm gonna like turn down the tempo a little bit and then see if it's lining up. Oh, it's still going off. I'm gonna have to slow it down. I'm gonna have to like slow down the track a little to get it back in line, then slow it down a little more. So that's it. You're just going back and forth. Like you're evaluating how the beats are lining up with the currently playing record, with this record in your headphones. That's why like I always have one ear to the monitors, one ear to the headphones. And that's the part that is super confusing, and you just have to do it a bunch, and it's gonna be a little painful, and then suddenly it just clicks, and your brain is like, oh, I can just listen to two pieces of music like separately, and it feels okay. It's a weird thing. And then you get it, and then you can do it. And if you get really far off, the thing to do is be like, okay, I'm like, it's totally a mess, start back over, re-cue up the record, which just means you spin the record till you get to the first beat, find it, and you can, when I'm doing this, all I'm doing is like getting the tempo, so I'm matching it to whatever is playing, so I'm like, you know, like this track, I'll just do it.
Yeah.
So here's a record that's playing. These records, like, I just have to caveat, not the greatest records, but there are practice records, so they're slow, they're easy to match. So I can kind of just do this. Oh yeah, sorry.
How did you do that?
Make this easy for you.
Oh no.
Actually, like
the turntable.
oh, so the turntable on my left is playing. You can hear that, right? I'm gonna turn it up a little bit. So yeah, this one's playing. I'm gonna play on this one. I'm gonna leave this channel up so you can hear what's happening. I wouldn't do this in the room, but this is what I would hear in my headphones. So right now, this track is playing. They're not matched. You can actually hear this a lot slower. So what I'm gonna do is I'll cue it up. So what I'm doing is I'm looking for the first beat. I reached like the lead in of the record, so there's nothing. So I'm gonna go forward till I hit that beat. I hit the beat. So now I'm just cueing, so 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm just getting the speed right. So that when I drop it drops in on the 1. And I'm not gonna worry about matching the phrase because right now I'm just trying to get the BPMs correct on the incoming track. 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. And I can hear it's really slow, so I'm definitely gonna have to speed it up. So I'm gonna use my finger and just. So what I'm doing there is I'm speeding this up using my finger while I'm also increasing the pitch to try to get it closer, because I know it's really far off. That's pretty good. So now I'll let it play for a few seconds, see if it gets off. It's a little off. It actually might be a little fast. So I'm gonna push this down a little bit. And that's close enough. So yeah, in other ways to if you need to make a really slight adjustment, I could grab the spindle and just give it a little twist. That actually just got it off, but you can also you'll see DJs doing something called groove riding where they're actually moving the pitch fader constantly. So I could if I know this is now a little fast, I could go down just a little bit and back up, just to give it a little bump. Yeah, but then try to come back to the exact same point. If you're trying to mix 2 tracks or 1 track that has a live drummer, you actually have to do that constantly because live drummers, if they're not machines, their tempo is always changing slightly, sometimes a lot. So that's why I suggested if you brought your own tracks, not to bring tracks with live drummers because they're very hard to beat match, especially for beginners. So that's more or less how you do it on here.
Oftentimes you'll have the 2 playing together like that for a period of time. And one would cut off.
Yeah, and often what I would be doing is.
You don't usually need them playing together forever.
No, sometimes you'll do it for a long time. Yeah, if they work well together. So, and sometimes you'll be I gotta do this quick. Especially with disco music where it's very full and melodic. Tracks like this where they're pretty bare, you can kind of play with the frequencies and get them to play together for a while, especially with no vocals. But if it's a really full track, there's orchestral sounds and stuff, lots of vocals, you might need to transition really quickly. When you bring in, usually, right there I didn't do any EQing. I just brought both tracks in full. That means a lot of frequencies are probably clashing, especially in the low end. A lot of dance music, a lot of the volume that's being created is the bottom end of the track. So a really typical way to do it is to turn the bass knob all the way down on the track you're bringing in, and maybe the high and the mid down a little bit. And once you get it all the way in, you can do things and they're matched, you feel steady. You can kind of do things with EQ, drop the highs out on one and bring the highs on the other at a specific moment to kind of create a little moment in the song where things start to transition. And then when you're really ready to kind of move to the new track as your main track, you can swap the bass, which means turn the bass all the way down on the outgoing track, all the way in on the incoming track. And DJs do this all the time. And that's when the dance floor, once you do that, the dance floor is gonna feel it. You can do that really slowly. You can try to, a lot of deep house DJs will try to make their transitions so seamless you don't even notice they're there. That can be, as a DJ, that can define your style. You can be that's always my goal. I'm always gonna try to pull that off. That is the kind of DJ I am. I don't mind there being moments when people know the track is changing as long as it feels good. And so I actually like that moment where the bass swaps and you're oh, new track. You still hear the other track receding, but the new track is coming on. It's all down to your own style and how you want to deal with it.
Do you try to match the high end stuff in the transition?
A trick with beat matching is listening. If both tracks have like snares and claps, that's the part that's easiest to match. It's harder to try to, if two tracks are just kick drums, it's harder, but you can still do it. But yeah, I like to listen to like, because they're sharp and they're easier to like line up. That is beat matching by ear. If you're using players, let me just get up a couple tracks.
And now you might not want to always stay at that tempo, right? Like you have to blend them together to work. When do you change? Like if you're speeding things up?
So the way I DJ, I play a lot of house music, and I like to slowly build the tempo over time. So I'm always like, just in a way that hopefully people aren't super aware of, I'm just always slowly like bumping up the tempo, planning to play records that are a little faster as the night goes on. We program our night, so like if you come at the beginning of the night, you'll probably hear quieter stuff, not quieter, slower stuff. If you come later, it's probably gonna be a lot faster, just so that people who are there for the whole time, like the night builds. But even within a single set, there are various tricks you can use to do big transitions in tempo, especially using digital players. I'm not like super well versed in all of them, and it's probably like a little beyond the scope of what we're trying to do today, but there are ways to like do big transitions.
But you can change the tempo in the middle of the song?
You can, you just want to do it gradually in small increments, so it doesn't throw the dance floor way off, unless it's for a big effect. Like you could be playing a track, and you want the whole dance floor to like take notice and really like slow down. There are tracks that do that within the track itself, and those tracks are great to transition from one genre to another. On a digital player, it's a little simpler if your tracks are beat gridded out properly, which I gotta say, if you just buy a digital track, you load it into Rekordbox, 9 times out of 10, it will get the beat grid correct. What I mean by that is it will understand the first beat as the 1, and the last beat in a bar is the 4. And it'll map that across the whole track. And if it's quantized, like if someone made it with a drum machine, it'll all be perfect and fine. And if you have 2 tracks that are like that, beat matching on these players is like incredibly simple. Let's see, what BPM is this? Okay, we'll just use this one. I don't even know what track this is, but. So it's a similar process. You have this cue button. Rekordbox will by default set your cue point as the first beat of the song. So I'll bring this one in too. So if I hit the cue button, so it's very similar to what I was doing with the record. You could also play it and actually use the platter. So, but a lot of people use the cue button, so they'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, play. In this track, this is faster. So it's off. The thing with these digital players is I have a readout. I can see what the BPM is. So I know this one's 123, about. This one's 124. I can just set it to 123, and that's that. I'm pretty much done. So like now, 2, 3, 4, play. It's pretty much in. It's close enough. And then like you can do, if you didn't hit play at exactly the right time, this little outer wheel, if you just push that, it'll nudge it forward and back. So like you could do like a big nudge, and that'll get it way off. And then you can try to nudge it back in. But beat matching is very easy in that sense. I can also press the sync button, and then I'm like, with these kind of tracks, I'm sure it's not going to get off at all. Look at the master tempo on. A lot of my tracks aren't beat gridded that well because I've ripped them from vinyl, and there's a little bit of flutter. Like vinyl isn't perfect, like it's always changing tempo just slightly. So a lot of times my beat grids are a mess, and I have to do this by ear too. So I've just gotten myself into a whole world of having to manually beat match. But it is still good to learn how to beat match because you will run into situations where, for whatever reason, you're dealing with a live drummer, or your beat grid isn't right, or this screen is broken. Like if you rely on it, you can get tripped up. You can encounter situations where you wish you had been able to do it. And it also just increases your understanding of what's going on with the music. But that's for these players, that's basically it. I'll just do a loop, like just to show you what that is. So that's just a 1-bar loop, and you can make it shorter. Oops. If I know how to do it. I have to go to the performance pad. So
that was all you just done.
that was me I just made a loop and I made it shorter and shorter and shorter. Not very well at all. But the loop function is really useful. Like if you're like looking for a track, which to me, this is like a bonus to most people. You can load your whole collection on this one USB. I find it a bit of a downside because it's like then you can look at for a track forever. You can look through all your tracks. So like if you're running out of time to find a track, you can make a loop. Like say you wouldn't want to do one that's short. You want to do one that's like like 4 bars, 8 bars, and then spend time finding your track and then load it into that loop. But so when you're learning, like at first you're going to have to like cue up your record, drop it in, make adjustments, probably start over, cue it up again, drop it in, make adjustments until you get it right. It might take you a while. You might be like running out of time on the record that's playing. So if you just cue it and drop it in and it's exactly right, then you're very lucky. But it probably isn't. And so you have to decide if it's too fast or slow. You have to adjust the pitch control to get it to the right speed. And then you have to go back and cue it up, start it over again. And keep doing that till you get it right. And then once you feel like you're confident it's right, you can start to fade in and do the mix. Once you're getting better, what might happen is you cue up the second record in time with the first, you correct the time speed manually as you're going, you adjust the pitch control to make the correction, and then if it's exactly right, you did it, and if not, you get it back in sync and fine tune it. So in other words, you're not constantly cueing back to the beginning. You're just like on the fly, like what I was doing at first, where I was like speeding up the record and adjusting the pitch at the same time, getting it in sync without having to like take the needle off, cue or whatever, like cue it all the way back up, start, drop it back in. So that's just like as you progress. We talked about EQing. This is just talking about that a little bit. Cutting, which I mentioned before, is the act of a record is playing, you have another record that's queued up at the point that you want it to start, and then you pick a time that you want this track to end that feels like appropriate and will work in the mix, and then you just drop it in and cut over to it. It's just cutting. In hip hop, that's very common. There's a lot of lyrics, so you can't always do a blend because it'll just be like a mess, but it's also like an exciting way to transition. It's like a powerful, impactful way to transition. And then within that world of cutting, there's things like beat juggling, which is where, because I think someone asked about it, where one record's playing for a certain section, and they used to do this. This is how like kind of hip hop and DJing was born, is like taking these breaks in tracks where like it just that in old soul music there would be a time called a break where just a drummer would play like kind of like a solo in the middle of the track, and people would. Breakdancing comes from like dancing hard and during that break, because that's like the really exciting part of the song is very percussive. So taking that break, having two of the same record, that break plays, and then right at the moment that it's going to go back to the rest of the song, maybe back to the vocals, you start the break over on this record. And then as it's about to end, you start over on this record. And beat juggling is doing that, like letting it play, queuing this record up to the right point again, dropping it in at the right time, queuing this record up, dropping it at the right time, back and forth, and you can keep that break going forever. And like house music to some extent is like a way of doing that with disco, where you're taking the part of disco that is the most fun, which is like the big bass and the, like some of the percussive elements, and just extending that over a whole track, but in the production. So we don't do that as much with dance music, and even in hip hop, like people aren't always doing beat juggling routines, but they do scratch, and all those traditions are still alive. And you can bring as much of that as you want into dance music DJing as well. And then there's all sorts of like tips on when to cut. I'm gonna kind of move through that because we are like way over. So these are just a couple of resources that you might not find on your own, like kind of searching around the interwebs. But this book, How to DJ Right, it's kind of dated, but I actually really like it. I think it just really goes through in a sensible way, like how you approach learning to DJ and all the range of techniques and all that. So I highly recommend that. I'll send you these links after as well, links to both of these. And then the other one is that DJ Octa and her partner Eris Drew made this PDF called Hot and Ready DJ Tips, Tricks and DJ Tips, Tricks and Techniques. And it's just a really great little like PDF manual of how to get into DJing, how to start record collecting, like just their philosophy, and it's like beautiful and great. So I will send that to you as well. If you have any questions, let's go.
So how do you get it so that you can hear the track, part of the track on your headphones, and then you can hear it also through there? Like how do you just set that up?
Right, so When the fader is up, the track will be playing on whatever track. That's the track that's playing live through these and also through the front of house speakers if this were like a club. If there would be other speakers in this room. And these are the booth speakers. And you can control the volume of these booth speakers with a little volume knob. So on a separate channel, you would put a record on or hit play on one of these digital players. And then there's a cue button. So when you hit that cue button, even though the fader is down, it's going to send that full signal into your headphone. So you're only, in the headphone at that moment, you're only hearing the track that's queued up, and you're not hearing the track that's playing live. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
There's also a knob, like there's a volume for your headphones as well, and there's a knob, a cue mix knob on a lot of mixers for the headphones specifically. So what I can do, that knob is like a spectrum where on one end, the cue end, you're just hearing the track that you've assigned cue to through your headphones. If you move it towards the mix is on the other side of the dial, it will start to feed more of the signal that's out in your monitors into the headphones as well. So at that time, if you have it like right in the middle, you're hearing half of what's on this record you've cued and half of what's already playing. So it can be nice before you mix in, you have like your full cue in your headphones, you're hearing with your other ear what's in the room. You could even like flip the other earphone on and move it to the middle, and then you're hearing what the blend would sound like in your headphones. I can show you all this like with the actual players, but yeah, that's the thing. And so you can also like, if you hit cue even on the track that's playing, it will send it to your headphones. So any track that you hit the cue button on, whatever is moving through that channel will go to your headphones. So for those who aren't in the room, thank you for watching this Intro to Dance Music DJing, which was very much an in-person workshop. Like now we're going to move on to a part where the participants here get to jump on the decks and try it out for themselves. You at home, I encourage you to get your hands on some DJ equipment and get into it yourself. And we may run this workshop again, so if you have any interest, please email newmoondanceparty@gmail.com and let me know you're interested, and maybe if we get enough people, we can put together a follow-up workshop. Thank you so much.
Yay. Thanks for joining us for the Co-Creative Sessions, funded in part by the Acushnet, Dartmouth, and New Bedford local cultural councils, local agencies which are supported by the Mass Cultural Council, a state agency, and funded in part by 2 programs administered by the New Bedford Economic Development Council, federal award number SLFRP 1067, awarded to the City of New Bedford by the U.S. Department of the Treasury, and by the U.S. Small Business Administration, SBA, via the Community Navigator Program to support COVID-19 small business recovery. Stay tuned for upcoming sessions and view previous sessions in the series by visiting the Co-Creative Center's events page at cocreativenb.org. We look forward to seeing you at the next Co-Creative Session.